How's everyone doing this morning? Give yourself a big round of applause. You're at the 4th annual Educational Leadership Summit here at Campus San Bernardino. I just want you guys to know, first of all, my name is Kerry Neal. I have the pleasure and honor to be your MC today, but I'm not just the MC, I'm also a doctoral student here in the doctoral studies program. Absolutely. We are a research institution as a result of that program. And in addition to that, I'm also an employee with University Advancement, so my job is to raise funds to provide our multiple initiatives. We also want to thank Schools First Federal Credit Union and Growing Energy for their generous sponsorship. You got me here for free. We've been charged with things. That food is free. Everything else, they made it possible. Let's give them a big round of applause. The food's great too. You got the various options. Some even vegan options over there too, right? Reminds me of a joke. How do you know someone is vegan? How do you know someone is vegan? They will let you know. So we're going to have a land acknowledgement done this morning. So we will acknowledge the land in which this campus resides on. And to lead us in that will be Nathan Schubert Estrada. Let's give him a big round of applause.
justified this choice. As many of you know, we have had a lot of talk about shutting down the Department of Education. Should that happen, it would be a major step back to the history of this nation's role and contribution to the global educational landscape. As I was reflecting on all those conversations and our topic for this conference, I was thinking back to the 1948 Article 26 of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. It states that education is the basic building block of every society. It is the single best investment countries can make to build prosperous, healthy, and equitable societies. The third American president, Thomas Jefferson, is quoted to have said, quote, "Educate and inform the whole mass of the people. They are the only sure reliance for the preservation of our liberty." End of quote. So Jefferson saw the education of every child, both as a right and as an investment. He believed that education was the only vehicle through which the American experiment of self-government could possibly succeed. Reading more about his views and contributions, he advocated for a broad, free, and public education for all citizens as an investment into the future of this nation. So America's investment in public education over the decades has proved him right, as it has yielded meaningful dividends. So any threat to end that investment could not possibly mean progress. Professor Derek Black was invited to this summit today as one of the keynote speakers because of the work he has done on educational law, and especially his book, Schoolhouse On. I read the book a few years ago after hearing him speak at the American Association of Colleges of Teacher Education. Brought the book home, and our college faculty here read it in our book club. And we saw the need to take the conversation beyond our college, to involve our partners in the conversation. So according to Dr. Black, and I want to quote him, he says the story of public education goes hand in hand with democracy and voting. He says that public education may be the one institution that helps rebind this nation's wounds and moves us once again closer to our democratic aspirations. So we've invited him today so that the rest of us can have this conversation together with him, especially at the time when we do not know what the future holds. So I want to say a big thank you to all of you for being here this morning. I want to thank you for your partnerships. All the K-12 leaders, both from San Bernardino and Riverside counties, we're here because of you. What we do here is only meaningful because of the partnership we have with you. And your partnership has helped shape the educational landscape for this region. And we are glad that we are part of that work. So I want to say thank you for many of you who continuously come since we started this summit. Your support has been very much encouraging. And I want to also thank some of our higher ed partners. I have deans from other universities who are here. I have colleagues from other CSUs who are here. So I want to say thank you to all of you for being here. I want to thank my colleagues at Cal State San Bernardino, my fellow deans from the other colleges who are also here. Thank you for coming out to be part of this conversation. Since I'm not the keynote speaker, I'm going to keep it short. But I also would like, before I end my presentation, to thank our sponsors. Schools First Federal Credit Union has been a strong partner and have supported us from day one on this project of having this community engagement and other areas of partnership that we enjoy with them. So I want to say thank you.
Totalitarians had infiltrated our public schools and newsrooms with, quote, new far-left fascism that demands that you speak its language, perform its rituals, recite its mantras, and follow its commandments. Their aim, according to him, was nothing less than to overthrow the American Revolution. He's talking about y'all. They're coming to lock us up soon. 3 months later, he issued an executive order to bring patriotic education to public schools and end instruction that teaches children to, quote, hate their own country. But I want to be crystal clear. The erosion of democracy is not just about Donald Trump. In so many ways, big and small, our public schools came under attack precisely because they are the last pillar of democracy. They are the nation's largest governmental institution. If faith in our public schools falter, so too will the stability of our democracy. And the path to power, for those who would seize it, will be cheap. We live in an era when democracies die not by coup d'etat, not by fatal swoops, but by 1,000 cuts. Not by the end of elections, but elections in which the results are preordained by legislation that narrows the electorate, gerrymanders the district line, or frightens the opposition away. I hope that by the time our time together today is over, you can glimpse the storm clouds closing in on our public schools. Not so that you might shrink in fear, but so that we might respond with a more clenched jaw determination to sustain our constitutional democracy, to sustain our public schools that stand as a pillar of that democracy. I hope that we might summon the courage to cast aside our partisan differences, our geographic gulfs, our policy preferences, our short-term thinking, and respond to the death of the public schoolhouse, respond to the death of democracy, respond to the death of constitutional values that supersede the whims of any majority. I hope that we might say, not today. As I look out across this audience of earnest school leaders, I'd ask that you reflect on why you got into this business. I hope it was about your passion for this 200-year-old project called public education. I hope it was empathy for children who, despite every other disadvantage in life, might, with your help, succeed against the odds. For me, it was the idea that public education is the inheritance that we all share, and one that is crucially important for kids like me who could have never hoped for an inheritance in the traditional sense. For me, it was about safeguarding and nurturing that inheritance for the current and future generations. Now, I was a little bit late to this game. I came to it through civil rights litigation, academic learning, and personal reflection. But you've always been the guardians of democracy, and it needs you now more than ever. Teachers and school leaders cannot save democracy by themselves, but they can make a difference. They deserve and can earn a community's respect almost like no one else. They can lead on issues that matter to us all, blue and red. They can teach lessons that do not appear on any standardized test, but model what it means to be a responsible citizen in a democracy that teeters on its edge. Now, to be clear, I don't think any of them should dive into the culture war. I don't think they should pick sides in political fights. I think they should rise above it with values that unite a people, that unite communities. So with that, let me give you a very short version of the democratic history of public education. If you're having trouble sleeping, you can read the book later, and what I see happening today. So, as to the history, the nation is founded on a radical idea of giving political power to regular people. Now, by regular people, they meant white men with land. But even then, the idea of giving political power to a bunch of farmers was a radical idea. And folks like Hamilton in particular thought if we just give political power to these folks, they might take all our stuff. And so the only way democracy would work without regular people taking rich people's stuff and without regular people coming to each other with pitchforks was public education. And I'm going to move very quickly. But in 1780, John Adams wrote the Massachusetts Constitution, and he put in it the world's first education clause. And it said that, to get my glasses out here now, it shall be the duty of legislatures and magistrates in all future periods of this Commonwealth to cherish the public schools and grammar schools in the towns. Adams believed that he literally said it was more important to the upper ranks of society to have public schools than the lower ranks, because that is the place where we would find that common ground, that common interest. Thomas Jefferson authored the Bill for the more general diffusion of knowledge. And he said, it's believed that the most effective means of preventing tyranny would be to illuminate, as far as practicable, the minds of the people at large. And thus the state ought to provide public education at the common expense of all. And he devised a very intricate plan that I don't have time to tell you about today, but the ideas of these two men find their way into the Northwest Ordinances of 1785 and 1787. These are popular on the East Coast. I don't know how popular that history is on the West Coast, but the Northwest Ordinances of 85 and 87 are the land deal that makes the United States Constitution possible. In that document, the colonies give up their claims to the Northwest Territories. For some reason, Virginia, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania all thought they owned Ohio, but they give up their claims to that territory and establish the rules by which territories would become states. And some 30-odd other states come in to this union under the rules of the Northwest Ordinances, which precede the United States Constitution. Big ticket statement in there, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. And to make sure that that happened, the Northwest Ordinances carved up every remaining square inch of land in the United States of America into squares. Anybody here from Ohio? Got one person. Ohio has square counties. Anybody here from Pennsylvania? Anybody from Kentucky? I know we've got someone who lived in Kentucky. The county lines in Kentucky are, as we would say in the South, as crooked as a dog's hind legs. Actually, they're even more crooked than that. And the difference is that for the rest of the country, we would carve up the land into squares. Every town would be comprised of 36, 32 lots, and the center lot, the 16th lot of every town, would be reserved for public schools. And 9 of the outer lying lots would be reserved to generate resources for the public schools. So before we even had a United States Constitution, we had a plan for public education as the foundation of our democracy. Now, of course, we fast forward, we're moving quick, right? Our democracy nearly fails as a result of slavery. And at that moment of time, we have millions of enslaved people denied the right to read and write, and lots of poor whites as well. And so black people gathered in the South in what they called Colored People's Conventions. And the Colored People's Convention of the state of South Carolina gathered at the Zion Church in Charleston, which happens to be the same church where Dylann Roof massacred black parishioners during Obama's presidency. But they gathered there in November 1865 to articulate their vision for democracy, what they wanted Congress to do to give democracy a rebirth. And they resolved, this was a unanimous, immediate resolution, we asked that the three great agents of civilized society, the school, the pulpit, the press, be as secure in South Carolina as in Massachusetts or in Vermont. Congress heard the freedmen, and so when they set the terms for readmitting the South, they said Southern states needed to do three things to gain readmission to the Union. They had to ratify the 14th Amendment, they had to give black men the right to vote, and they had to rewrite their state constitutions to conform to a Republican form of government. And what does that mean in 1867? That means the same thing it meant in 1780 and in 1776 when Adams and Jefferson were talking about it. It meant a society that provides public education to its children. And as a result of that, the southern states rewrote their constitutions, went from a region where only one of them guaranteed public education to a region in which every one of them guaranteed public education. Now, of course, we have another dark period of Jim Crow that follows that, and public education is a centerpiece of turning democracy backwards. But it's worth noting that when Charles Hamilton Houston and the NAACP developed their strategy to end segregation, they didn't start at the ballot box. They didn't start at the bus stop. They started at the schoolhouse. And the argument was, though we may be segregated and unequal in every other aspect of American society, there is one place in America where we cannot be. The public schoolhouse is special. And it is that theory that becomes the centerpiece of the Supreme Court's decision to declare in Brown versus Board of Education school segregation unconstitutional. Well, what's happening today? We could talk about history for a long time. This is from John Roberts, Chief Justice. We've come to take democracy for granted, and civic education has fallen by the wayside. In our age, when social media can instantly spread rumor and false information on a grand scale, the public's need to understand our government and the protections it provides is more vital than ever. Civic education, like all education, is a continuing enterprise and conversation. Each generation has an obligation to pass on to the next, not only a fully functioning government responsive to the needs of people, but the tools to understand and improvement. 2 out of 3 Americans agree, indicating they believe our democracy is growing weaker and that public education is a part of the solution. One might take that as good news. Unfortunately, public education is surrounded by a much larger global erosion of democracy around the world. Over the past 2 decades, the total number of democratic governments has shrunk. Likewise, the continuing viability of those democracies that remain is diminishing, as what scholars call democratic erosion. Though seemingly immune at first, the United States is facing its own crisis. By 2016, major research outlets were downgrading their assessment of American democracy. One formally characterized it as a flawed democracy, another as a backsliding democracy. By 2021, the U.S. had slipped so far in international assessments of democracy that it was on par with countries like, and I don't mean to demean them, but on par with countries like Panama, Romania, Croatia, and behind countries such as Argentina and Mongolia. Now, how do we measure democratic erosion? We measure it through free and fair elections, individual liberties, and the rule of law. These are the basic metrics that international scholars use to measure it. How does democracy erode? it erodes by undermining the first strategy is erosion by undermining faith in government itself, right? Attacking it also by purging governmental agencies of people that disagree with those in power, by eliminating checks and balances, by abusing power, by restricting free speech, information, the media, and academic freedom, by populist appeals based upon religion, race, ethnicity, citizenship, by demonizing and repressing those who oppose people in power. Now, the pillar of American democracy and stability, as I say, is public education, and that makes sense. It is the largest governmental institution in our country. It is politically independent, nonpartisan, bipartisan, and constitutionally insulated in most state constitutions. It is to children what the media is to adults. It is the major conduit of information and narratives, and it shapes lifelong values. If you were looking to attack democracy, interestingly, this might be one of the first places you would look. And the flashing red warning signs, and this is since I wrote the book, and education are growing long, right? That now we have politicians legislating curriculum. There are 563 critical race theory bills that have been introduced over the last 3 years. There are 200 anti-LGBTQ bills that have been introduced over the last 3 years. And look, hey, people in this room are used to legislators messing with your curriculum. That's not new. But these bills are fundamentally different than education standards. These are not about telling you the ideas you need to cover. These are telling you about ideas you need to exclude. These aren't telling you about books that you might consider. They're telling you about books you cannot read. And they are not viewpoint neutral. They are taking the decisions away from education professionals. We also see a demonization of education institutions and actors. I mean, the words that they have been used are quite stark. Groomers? First time somebody calls me a groomer, it was, I mean, I wasn't like worried about it, but it was upsetting. Particularly if you're in education, for someone to call you a groomer. Marxists, communists, indoctrinators, they use warlike rhetoric. Peter Segath, who you might have noticed, was named as a nominee to be Secretary of Defense, wrote a book with a commentator. All this counterinsurgency, warlike rhetoric, talking about public schools. What in the world are you talking about? Talk about fining teachers, sowing fear of teachers, of what these people are trying to do to your children. We've got an attempt to delegitimize America's most prominent government institution. We've got populist, nationalist, ethnic, and religious rhetoric all over the place in attacking our public schools. The people are supposed to be against these elites, the federal government, the radicals. Or as Ted Cruz said, to save the white babies. We have calls for true patriots, for patriotic education, for classical education, for 1776 curriculum, to post the Ten Commandments in every school, to teach the Bible in public school. And we have abuses of power in our public schools. I won't go into all the details. You know, during COVID, presidents and governors were doing all kinds of things that I said was beyond their power. Some governors, so thirsty to get vouchers, have been involved in some of those, took executive action that violated the Constitution. We've got governors, Glenn Youngkin, claiming authority to dictate curriculum that he does not possess in the state of Virginia. We have governors in Tennessee and Florida creating special relationships with private institutions like Hillsdale College and Prager, not through some open process, but through a closed process, right? And we have backlash against the democratic principles of our schools themselves. These are the actions of autocracy that have eroded democracy and all other facets of government across the world. And they are in our public schools now. "54 seconds. I don't always give this speech. This moment in history, this political body is decidedly different than those that preceded it just some 5 or 10 years ago. 10 years ago, the democratically eroding forces currently sweeping the globe had yet to clearly arrive on America's shores. Just some 5 years ago, judges and jurists were hopeful enough that they spoke of public education as a much-needed panacea to our democratic ills. Just some 5 years ago, the tools of democratic erosion had yet to infect what I call democracy's last pillar, the public schoolhouse. The question for us now is whether this current moment in history must be understood as one teetering on totalitarianism or just another complicated day in the long life of American democracy. Are we just experiencing the growing pains of an increasingly diverse nation? Our courts call our public schools the nurseries of democracy, but will our representative democracy work if schools can't protect the marketplace of ideas? Our public schools are not, never have been, and in my lifetime never will be perfect. But for 200 years, they have walked hand in hand with voting to expand our democracy. They've been the closest tangible manifestation of that more perfect union we have so long chased. They've been the closest thing to common ground we have managed. It's always been intimately bound up in the myth of America. The stories we tell about public schools, the stories they tell our students, have always mattered to America's future. They've always been imagined as sites of democracy, as institutions to which we could perpetuate the myths that would bind us together. If we strip public education from the future narrative of American democracy, nothing else will take its place. Myths about school choice, religion in schools, and founding ideas that were supposedly perfect don't fit the multicultural and intellectually diverse America we inhabit. But it's not enough to tell the story of democracy. We have work to do. Our schools have fallen victim not just because they are a convenient means to acquire power, they've fallen victim because they've often left themselves open to it. After all this time, we still haven't figured out how to have the hard conversations on which democracy is built. Too often, our schools run from controversy rather than confront it. And although we suddenly seem really interested in dredging up history, we haven't found a way to teach students to have honest conversations about it. The truth is, so often, we really want our students to jump to conclusions that we think are correct. Conclusions that fit a policy agenda, politically correct expectations, or venerate our chosen heroes. We haven't taught them what I think may be the very most important lesson. If we don't cherish our communities, if we don't cherish our institutions, when we get whatever it is that we want, when we finally get it, there won't be any community or institutions left. And it all adds up to the simple realization that our schools stand at the crossroads of democracy. One path is clear and relatively easy. It destabilizes our democracy through the denigration of our schools. That path will end badly. The other is long, hard, and its road signs are only vaguely marked. But it involves saving our schools, binding our communities, and rebuilding our democratic identity through public education. I hope you are among the courageous few who still believe we can do hard things in America. Thank you.
Okay, like one more big round of applause for Professor Black. Was that extraordinary? I want to thank you so much for your time, but we have Q&A. People got questions. So I got my question in early. You know, I was talking about the Department of Education being unplugged, so he gave me some insight on that, which is why it may not happen. But so if you have a question, okay, Mike, raise your hand. Mike, where you at? Right here. And we got Ginger right there, right hand. They will bring the mic to you, so we don't have to have you guys line up, whatever else the case may be. We will bring the mic to you if you have a question for Professor Black. So, feel free, jump in. This time is reserved for you and your inquiry. We got to do something about everybody trying to come to the mic at once, son.
Well, you know, I told him it was all over with, so, you know. We could take your question if you want.
Here we go.
Thank you, Professor, for a very good presentation and analysis of our situation. But my comment or question is, don't you think maybe it's time to redefine and reframe the concept of democracy? Because my experience is that under this democracy, it doesn't involve the distribution of economic resources in a fair and equitable way. For instance, America is the best democracy we have so far, and the richest economy. But a lot of people don't have access to those resources, and few that are rich kind of overload the whole political and democratic system, and they use the power of their money to buy access to those in the government. For instance, they take all the productions of